Hello again, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent. Thanks for joining us here on one of the world's biggest gun talk programs as we chat with the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting. And of course, that interesting person today is Roy Huntington, my unofficial co-host. I keep trying to make him an official co-host, and he just doesn't want to commit to it. He's retired. He's got stuff to do.
I don't want to be official. So.
Yeah, you need to be official, but the folks love you, and I really enjoy talking to you. And the episodes where you're on do really well because folks like to hear what you got to say. So,
I appreciate that. Well, we like to hear what they have to say, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're really good about checking comments, and you occasionally argue with folks, which I find tremendously funny because I'm probably a little snarkier than you are, and sometimes I get my dander up. But when you finally have had enough, it's funny because you generally cut people all the way to the bone. So, anyway,
in a good way.
Exactly. Yeah. In a good way.
In a positive way.
Well, today's topic is really kind of an interesting one, I think, because it's something that gets discussed quite a bit. And the perspectives of age versus youth are interesting, and old school versus new school. But we're going to talk about gun culture and how it's changed and where it's going and kind of all the factors around that, because this is not only a shooting topic, but it's a bigger topic in the world. And we're just going to focus on the shooting side of it. But this is one of those things that I can't claim that we know the right answer, but we're going to kind of examine it and talk about it. And as we said about comments, leave us your comment because I'm interested to see what the audience thinks. So, Roy, the gun culture, it has certainly changed from the time we were young pups back in the day, riding dinosaurs with our wheel guns to work at the cop shop. But how do you think, where does gun culture stand today, and how has it changed?
I think the first thing we have to ask is, what is gun culture? Because it's different everywhere.
True.
I mean, gun culture in the Northwest is different from the Southeast, is different from Texas, is different from Central California.
Yeah, certainly.
I mean, yeah. And so, but if we had to paint it with a broad brush, I would say it's gone from hunting and precision target shooting, in the turn of the century in teens and 20s and 30s and 40s into the 50s, to more defensive, tactical kind of looking. And then we can thank the NRA for that, in a bizarre way. I don't really want to thank them for that. If you get an American Rifleman from 1965, it'll be guys in plaid hunting coats holding bolt-action 30-06s talking about what's the best deer rifle, this year. And then you'll see Camp Perry guys standing there at the 50-yard line shooting pistols one-handed. And, and it was, I don't know, and there were kids, and it was just seemed almost kinder, gentler. I mean, there was really never anything about the defensive use of a gun. And I think it was because people just assumed that you understood that. I mean, if you're a husband and you were at home, you probably had a 38 tucked away, and that was to protect your family. I don't know. We didn't make a big deal about it. And then it became socially sort of popular. And so I think that's the biggest thing I see today. And so that the tactical side of shooting has also transformed much of hunting in that direction too.
Yeah.
You and I both know. I mean, when I see a new, dove hunting shotgun, I mean, to me, it looks like a breaching weapon.
Yeah,
for
sure. Yeah.
And a lot of times even, hunting handguns, dedicated hunting handguns tend to be still fairly traditional. There'll be single shotguns like Contenders and those kind of things, revolvers, and maybe with a red dot or a scope on them. So they tend to not be too tactardy.
Yeah.
I think we see higher end precision pistols like from Volkwartsen and Freedom Arms and stuff. And but you don't see that high intensity polymer pistol defensive shooting, crowd
Yeah.
in the hunting field with those guns.
Yeah.
So
Well, I've got a different take on it, and I think you made a good point with the NRA, but I think that's a symptom rather than the root cause. I really believe Gulf War I was the main driver of it, and the reason I say that, I really feel like gun culture, the lifestyle of firearms, had kind of gotten stagnant about that point, and then you get a whole generation of especially young men and some young women that went over in the sandbox and got to go to combat and point guns. And I think that created that awareness of AR-15s and then by extension polymer nines and all that. And I think it's completely normal. I think it's the same thing that you saw after World War II, that everybody knew how to run a Garand, and a lot of people had them. You could buy them from the CMP, for next to nothing. And there were shooting programs in the schools, and it wasn't the same thing in terms of tactics and all that, because that didn't really exist per se. That was just something you did in the war. And then when you got home, you talked about hunting. But I think it's the natural result of so many folks going into the military, actually going to combat, and they found that they really enjoyed shooting. They really enjoyed that AR-15. The part that I think is, and this may be controversial, but I've been talking to a lot of my cohorts in the industry, kind of talking about where do we go from here, and because we've got a downturn right now in the industry, and I think a lot of that black rifle, black plastic pistol stuff, I think it's actually run its course to some degree. Now, not saying it's suddenly not going to be a thing, but I've got a buddy that writes for our magazine that said, I really feel like everybody that wanted to own 12 AR-15s has bought them. Everybody that wanted to have 8 or 10 receivers and, stockpiled back has bought them. Everybody that wants a black polymer 9mm for self-defense and CCW has bought them. So now, and I think this is a good thing, a lot of those folks are starting to look at, what about these guns that have that wheel thing in them? Or what about these precision bolt action rifles or hunting or competition? So, I'm sure a lot of folks were going to say, you're crazy, you're out of your mind. It's always going to be all tactical all the time. But I think that, to me, is how the gun culture got started, how it's changing. And I won't be around to see the next iteration probably. But I do think the tide is turning, and this focus on quote unquote tactical, I think it's starting to wane a little bit.
I think possibly, yeah. It's interesting. After the first Gulf War, Clint Smith told me one day, he said, "You know what I predict?" And I said, "What?" And he said that as these people come back here, and it's what you said, there's going to be an explosion in the AR-15, and polymer defensive 9mm pistol market, and which was proven because the SHOT Show opened up. Because prior to that, you weren't allowed to show an AR-15 at the SHOT Show.
Right.
And they had a law enforcement section, and it ended up exploding in popularity, and that's like bigger than the rest of the show now. But Clint said when they come back, that there's going to be an explosion of veteran-operated shooting schools.
Oh, yeah.
And he was exactly right.
Yep.
Which further prompted what you were talking about, and which was also pushed by the NRA, though, which is that suddenly there was this emergency need for everyone to learn how to defend themselves,
Yeah.
And at the time, crime rates were going down. Crime rates are still going down. So really, there's less and less of a need for that. So, and then I think how the NRA helped with this, or I'm not sure if help's the right word, but they're always telling you that the government wanted to take away your guns, and that you have a right to self-defense. Before it was a right to go hunting, but now you have a right to self-defense. And of course, their focus was on, AR-15s and Glocks and guns that the government wanted to take away from you. So there was this sort of a perfect storm of two things happening at the same time. I think we need to look at the auto industry here for for some guidance and analogy, and that is that, in the 40s, old guys like me would collect cars from the teens, rickety Model Ts and old Buicks and stuff like that. And then, in the 50s, they wanted to start collecting Model A's from the 20s, in the early 30s. And then, of course, in the 70s and 80s, they wanted to collect muscle cars and Tri-550s, 55, 56, 57, 50s, or Chevys. And about that time, everyone said, oh, the industry is going to die out as all these old car collectors age out. And that suddenly you'll be able to get a pre-war Packard Phaeton for $10,000, which is a $100,000 car, right?
Yeah.
Except one thing. As the young people who showed no interest in a Tri-5 Chevy get older, now suddenly that's interesting to them, and the new slammed Mazda something with the exhaust that goes, with neon stickers on the side.
I've heard that described as a herd of West Nile mosquitoes.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it sounds like.
But as they age, they suddenly want to look at these more traditional things that have legs and have personality and have presence. And I think it goes back to what you said, which is everyone who wanted a polymer pistol bought it, with exceptions.
Yeah.
Everybody has a rack. I've been in people's houses and they have 25 AR-15s.
Yeah.
And it's my own shortcoming, but I have trouble telling them apart.
Yeah.
And they'll go by, well, this one here is this one, and this one has an impingement bolt, and this one has the new Plex 4-end mounting system, and and I got it. There's nothing wrong with that. Go do it. Absolutely, positively. We support it. We write about it. I understand. But so where are we now? I'll tell you where we are now. Smith & Wesson recently sent me 3 revolvers that they just introduced or reintroduced. And it was a exceptionally traditional 4-inch fixed sight pencil barrel Model 10 38 Special.
Wow.
With no lock on the side.
Amen.
And a absolutely dead nuts traditional Smith & Wesson blued Model 19 357 Magnum.
Yeah.
That looked like something I would have seen in my holster in 1978, and then a Model 36 J-frame 38 Special revolver, blued. None of those guns had locks. So why did they do that? They did that because I think people are hungry for something different and some tradition and some, a sense of, what's the right word? It makes you feel good.
Yeah.
I mean, when I pick up a beautiful old revolver, it starts this continuous loop video play in my brain.
Yeah.
Of the smell of Hoppy's number 9 and of the of things that I were doing back in the day with a gun like this and things like that. And so, I don't know where is the shooting culture today? I don't know, because I see pictures of pretty scary looking people, with bones in their nose and tattoos and all this kind of stuff, holding an AR-15, and it ends up that they're a Republican.
Yeah.
And you go, well, I don't understand this at all, right?
Yeah.
And there was a book that came out 10 or 15 years ago, and it was, I forget what it was, Americans and Their Guns or something like that. And this person went around the country and just sort of randomly found people who then took them home and posed with their guns.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. It was such a cross section of people.
Yeah.
And what it served to remind me is that we don't really have a gun culture. We really don't, because if this guy who collects old cars also likes guns, but this guy who owns a tattoo studio also likes old guns.
Yeah.
But they're from 2 very different cultures, if you ask me.
This is true.
Right?
Well, you I've got a whole list of things in my head I want to cover. So this is kind of a jumping around kind of thing. First of all, I had to laugh when you were talking about the rack of 25 AR-15s, and I know folks like that too. Can you imagine, Roy, back in the 70s, if you walked in and a guy said, I've got a whole bunch of Model 70s all down that rack and they're all identical? You'd go, are you out of your freaking mind? Unless you were a collector of,
Yeah.
But those guys were few and far between. But, you may have 2 or 3, but you didn't have a whole rack of Model 70s or 870 Wingmasters or whatever. So that's something that has changed.
I mean, unless but they were collectors.
Right.
Specifically collectors. Yeah.
Another point that you brought up that this is one that I tend to get on a soapbox about because I've got adult children and my grandkids are just elementary school age. We have failed as parents, and I say that facetiously. I think there's some of that, but a lot of it is the world today and social media and all that. Our kids are scared of everything. They are freaking scared. There is a boogeyman behind every window and every door and every car going down the street. And I mean, I love my family to death, but when you talk to them, they're convinced that there are bad people out there getting ready to get you. And it's funny, as a cop, most of my adult life, I want them to be aware of danger and bad things so that they're not stupid. But it seems like the entire culture has shifted towards this idea that, you have to have, it's not even a means of self-defense. It's something bad's going to happen to us every day, all the time, regardless, whether it's a pandemic or a bad guy or a car breaking down or your food's going to poison you. That stuff's always been around, but it seems to really have hit home. And the only thing I can think is the whole social media thing, because one person posts you that milk is toxic and that gets posted 10 million times. And now suddenly everybody thinks milk's toxic. So,
well, it also drives the defensive market, though.
Yeah.
The people who aren't a member of the gun culture suddenly show up at the gun store and say, I think I need to buy a gun.
Yeah. We saw that during the great pandemic.
Yeah. And the other thing, though, is, and you touched on it, was that 30 years ago, if there was a homicide in Joplin where I live, you would not know. And nor would probably 2 cities over know about it. Right?
Good point.
The Joplin Globe would have a story about it. We would all know about it, But now, if there's somebody arrested for arson in Roanoke, Virginia, chances are pretty good it's in my Yahoo News feed.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I've had people call me up and say, "Hey, what's with all this police brutality?" And I always tell them it's I think less than it ever was.
Yeah, I agree.
But the problem is if some cop gets into some kind of altercation with somebody in Atlanta, well, that's the top feed for everybody. We're normally 99.99999% of the population would not even know about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now suddenly it's in their news feed and they think, oh my God, look, that's 6 times this week.
And it wasn't a straightforward news story. As straightforward, we can't get into that whole argument of they slant the news, but at least the news is more or less, sort of, kind of, almost, and supposed to be down the middle. If somebody sees that a cop did something stupid in Atlanta and they hate the police, that's not going to be a straight down the middle. It's going to be, these police are doing this and awful, and you end up with things like defund the police, which, except for the crazy leftists, most everybody's finally come to their senses and realize that's a really bad idea.
It's true. But yet we'll go back to what I said, which is all of this stuff drives that whole fanaticism about the defensive market.
Yeah.
Which is, I think I have to go on record and say that's the biggest change in the gun culture, is that nowadays the first focus is on defensive shooting.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you look at the guns that are new, what are they? They're all plastic pistols with a TV set on top.
Yeah.
And those aren't hunting guns. Those aren't target pistols. Those are defensive, maybe action shooting pistols too. But even action shooting pistols are about defensive.
Yeah.
IDPA. I mean, that's all about defensive shooting kind of stuff. So I know there are still hunters. Hunting is continuing to decline. There seems to be more women now. There seems to be, as the millennial parents are aging in their 40s and whatnot, there seems to be an interest in them going hunting with their kids and getting in the outdoors more. So, I think it'll stabilize a little bit. I really do. But I think it's up to people like us and younger people than us who have the bully pedestal or podium, like Teddy Roosevelt used to say, who have the audience and the people with eyes on them, to encourage that, to have people understand that there's more to this than what we see in the news every day. And so if you go buy a bolt action hunting rifle and take your son hunting, and that's part of gun culture to be,
Well, I was going to say, to kind of further expound on that point, we recently had the 70th anniversary of Guns Magazine. And as we like to point out, we were the first newsstand shooting magazine. There was the NRA publications, but you had to be a member. But to go and buy a gun magazine on a newsstand, which I know our younger audience members don't even know what a newsstand is at this point. But when you went down to the drugstore and they had a whole big rack full of the Saturday Evening Post and the Reader's Digest and the Modern Farming, there was Guns Magazine. And we were the first. And so we've made 70 years. And when I was putting together the January issue of this year, 2025, going back through because I went and read every old issue I could find. And that was quite an eye-opener that journalism has gotten better along with technology. But to see the focus, what you had identified earlier, that it was an afterthought. I've got a gun. Oh, there's a bad guy. I'll shoot him with my whatever. And there wasn't that focus on, there was a lot of guns around. There was a lot of pistols around, but it wasn't such a special purpose. Self-defense wasn't a thing in and of itself. It was more like, here's how you hunt or engage in target practice or competition or whatever. And, oh, by the way, if a guy breaks in your house, you can shoot him with your bird hunting shotgun or the pistol that you've kept in a drawer for whatever, for whatever reason. So I think that's been a big change.
I was editor of American Handgunner for almost 20 years. And so I learned when I took it over in about 2000 or so, it was started in 1976. September 1976 was the first issue. And before they started it, the reason they did was that when they would run handgun articles in Guns Magazine, they would get a lot of mail. Hey, that was fun. Could you run another one?
Yeah.
And in those days, it was a lot of collecting surplus, Russian pistols. And there was a lot of, top cop autos, which were 3.
I was going to say
1911 high power and a Smith & Wesson 59 probably.
Yeah.
It was. I always used to laugh when they say, look at roundup of police autos, and there was like 4.
Yeah.
Now it would be hundreds. But so they started asking readers and advertisers, would you be interested if we did a handguns centered magazine? And I read letters and I talked to the people that were involved in this, like Tom von Rosen, who was the president at the time. And he said, boy, people were telling me that, like, well, why would you do that? Because handguns are things that, like, bank robbers use. Handguns are things that criminals use.
Yeah.
Why would you want to have an article about a Saturday night special? Why would you do that? Right? But there are smarter minds than them, said, actually, I think we can do this,
Yeah.
And so then we had that first issue. And in the early days, it was about collecting, and it was about a lot of revolver stuff. It was the extremely early days of pistol competition, so that was covered a lot, There was always a guns on the law column, silhouette shooting was popular, and lo and behold, it was really interesting. the handgunner was profitable from the first issue.
Hmm.
And so what did we learn, though? Is that we learned that sometimes the general public is wrong. Oh, those are only used by bad guys, right? Or advertisers are wrong. But I think that morphing, the constant flux, the constant change, the popularity of products as products fade. I think one thing that is being done more now than has ever been done before is that manufacturers are looking at the market carefully and then trying to manufacture products that the market wants.
Yeah.
And so it used to be Remington would say, we're going to make this. And then they would put it out there and then tell shooters they should buy it.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, now with the huge cross section of options we have, companies can't afford to do that, because if today somebody makes a polymer pistol, so does 50 other companies.
Yeah.
So you better have something unique and distinctive.
Yep. Well, some of this culture stuff we've talked about, obviously we're the old guys, and we really love what used to be. But I do want to end on an up note, a positive note, and I truly believe this, and you kind of already touched on it, but I wanted to go a little further. The culture of people shooting, it used to be old white guys or middle-aged white guys. And now there's a lot of folks of every race, creed, color, origin, orientation, fluidity. I'm not going to get into all that, but my point being, it won't be just old white guys standing on the line. And I think that's a good thing, because I think the more folks that we bring in, and I've told the story many times of, we had a PETA member come to one of our classes, people for ethical treatment of animals. I'm stereotyping, but they tend to be very left, very, vegetarian, vegan, anti-establishment, all that. And we kind of joked thinking it was a novelty t-shirt, and it wasn't. She had decided that people like us were out to kill her, and she needed to get some handgun training. And by the end of the weekend, she suddenly discovered, these gun people are pretty cool people. And I don't know that we changed her politics, but we planted the seed that maybe everything that we believe in and like and feel is important for a strong United States, suddenly she's rethinking, well, maybe some of that stuff's okay. And I think that is the shooting culture. Bringing in different folks is like the gateway drug to changing some minds about some of the crap that has been going on in our society. And politics are changing now, and they're shifting obviously back towards the right, but bringing more folks aboard as shooters and understanding that gun people are good people, and the sport is fun, it is safe, and it's just a good world, a good thing to be part of. It teaches you responsibility, and that's something that's lacking in this world today. People don't take individual responsibility. Well, you got to with a gun, or bad things happen. So I'm trying to end on a positive note, that I truly believe that bringing all these folks, the guy with the bone in his nose, as long as he is safe and supports the Second Amendment and enjoys shooting, I welcome him to the range, and you should too.
You brought up an extremely good point, and I think you said it better than certainly I was trying to say it, is that I think if there is a gun culture, that culture is the fact that, with extremely rare exceptions, I find gun owners to be polite and helpful and welcoming and open. In other words, I almost defy you to go to a range and go to the guy shooting next to you and say, "Wow, that's cool. Could you tell me about your gun?" And you'll be
there for a while.
welcomed. You'll get an offer to shoot it.
Yep.
He's going to help you learn about it, or she, right? And I've learned that multiple times. I mean, the scary looking guy next to me, with tattoos and things and pink hair, shooting a gun. If me, the FUD that I am, if I looked over and I said, well, it's a really interesting gun, can I look at it? They would say, sure, you bet, or they'd clear it and make it safe and hand it to me. And we would sort of be talking about guns for a minute then. And so I think that's the gun culture.
Yeah,
I do. I think that's the gun culture. And the people who don't know us think it's scary.
Yeah.
I had a relative years and years and years ago, and she was very fiercely anti-gun. And so she was over at my house one day, and I had a Ruger revolver that was laying on a table. I'd just taken it off and set it down. And I saw her like get squirm away, right? And I said, Margie, I said, what's wrong? And she said, oh, they just scare me. And I said, well, why do they scare you? And she said, well, I think it could shoot me. And so I said, well, no. And so I took 5 minutes and I unloaded the gun. I told her about it, explained it, and how it has to shoot and pull the trigger and all that kind of stuff. And it was really interesting because she visibly relaxed. And she said, you know what? I never knew how to make them not shoot me.
Oh, gosh.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
It's as simple as that, though. I mean, we laugh, right?
Yeah.
But there's someone that had absolutely zero exposure to any of that. And so she was mortified because she didn't know if it was going to jump up off the table and shoot her.
Well, and that's what's portrayed in the media a lot of times,
right? And so now Margie, who still doesn't own a gun, is part of the gun culture, I think. So
right. Very good. Very good. Well, that's a great place to end this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. As I always say, please like and subscribe and hit the alert button, notification button, because that's how we justify our phony baloney jobs. And as Roy would always say, we either got to do this or sell paint at Walmart. So nothing wrong with selling paint, but this is a lot more fun. So make sure you do that. And I'm sorry, I didn't ask, any final parting words or thoughts, Roy, before we toddle on out of here?
Just keep your mind open if you're a shooter. Don't be afraid to try new things. Always be welcoming. Teach a kid gun safety, and and just be engaging and be that. And
exactly.
It will make it more fun for you, I promise you.
Yep. And it helps the Second Amendment, which we should all be supporting every way we can. One last bit of housekeeping. If you want to buy Roy's book, The Insider, if you want to buy John Connor's Odd Angry Shot, or any of our special interest publications, you can go to fmgpubs.com and buy those. You can also do it on Amazon, but I always encourage you, go to fmgpubs.com and get those books. The Roy's Insider is a great read, and I'm not all the way through my copy as it's sitting next to my recliner, and sometimes other things get in the way, but it's a great book, and you need to get a copy of it. So check out fmgpubs.com, and that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of everybody that works so hard here at FMG Publications, I am Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you yet again, now get out there and get shooting.